systems programmer and administrator right now, although my role has shifted. We do not do cool stuff like this, but a hobby of mine is reproducible, just programming in general, right? So I like to push the pipeline through both development, TDD, continuous deployment, and then on the systems side, when I got into that, I found tools like Vagrant and Puppet that also help. So today I'll be talking a little bit about Vagrant and Puppet eventually as well. And so I guess you'll find out what those are later if you don't know. So I don't know how long you guys have been system administrators, but the old days, it takes some time to get your server set up. You'd have to find the hardware that you're going to order. You'd call up Dell. They'd quote you an obscene price, mostly support, so that you'd fly them in overnight when you couldn't set it up properly. You would receive that hardware that they finally shipped to you. You would install it. You'd get down in the server room. You'd have to rack mount it. It takes a long time to do that. And then you have to sit down and install the operating system and software by hand. And this process typically took weeks. And eventually you'd have a server build ready and you could start pushing out. And I don't know if you've ever had to name a server, but this XKCD pretty much nails what's going on. I don't know if you can actually read that. But he comments how he's spending a long time naming a server, but his daughter took 15 seconds to name. And that's how it was, right? You get a server, and that was your special snowflake. Are you going to name it Alabama or after Star Wars characters or lakes in Michigan? And that's not how we want to do things. So we've come a long way since then, with virtualization primarily driving that, the cloud with AWS and other services making these instances super available, containers, which we talked about Docker briefly before this, and all sorts of other buzzwords that are just floating around. So we've all taken these and applied them into production environments typically. Almost everybody, even at MSU, we're using VMware for virtualization stacks, and people are doing this everywhere. But the problem is, how do we take that from up here in the production environment and move it down to where we're testing at, where we're developing at, and allowing our developers an easy method to use these same technologies to make the whole stack smoother. And so that's how we take advantage of it. We would apply these tools through something called Vagrant, is one way to do it. What Vagrant is it's a way to provide a virtual machine to your developers. So it's nothing special. It needs to use something called VirtualBox or VMware Fusion or any other provider, but basically somewhere else will host this virtual machine, and then the Vagrant file is something that will control how that virtual machine looks. And the advantage of that is a Vagrant file looks something like this. And so, as you can see, it's a plain text file. And does anybody have an idea of what the advantage of a plain text file might be? Somebody's got to.
Write anywhere, read anywhere.
It goes in version control. So now you've got your version control VirtualBox set up that now all of your developers are creating a virtual machine that has the same things. And the advantage of that is obvious, right? Now we've created a production environment that's hardware similar to our dev environment, reverse that. In the Vagrant file, you can do several things. It'll install the OS right here. That's going to be basically an image you're going to find somewhere. You can create your own. It's not easy because you want to focus on keeping the space small and leave that to people who have done it before, typically, unless you have a reason. But so in this case, we're setting the OS to the Ubuntu Trusty 64. That's going to be 14.04, the latest stable release of Ubuntu. The file will also configure the virtual machine. You can do things like set the network. This first command will set the private internal network to have this IP, and so that on my box, my local machine, I can access it from that IP if I'm hosting anything on a port that I need to check out. The next one will allow you to sync folders. So if you're developing code, you can just mount that code on the virtual machine, and now you have a way to easily run it on the virtual machine. And then it also will provision the system, and what I mean by that is it'll do all that handcrafting, installing of software stuff that we discussed earlier, provided you write for it. So provisioning, this example, we use a shell script, but you can use any of your popular utilities, Puppet, etc. Using it is super simple. It's a command line application. Unfortunately, I don't know how hard or easy it is to use on Windows. anybody else has tried it out on Windows, feel free to speak up, but I can't offer much there. Your basic commands are the top three. Vagrant up will take your Vagrant file and run it, basically. It'll install the virtual machine. Well, first it'll check to make sure the virtual machine isn't created. It'll then install it if it needs to. If it doesn't need to, it'll just start it up. Vagrant SSH is just a proxy SSH. It'll do the magic it needs to do to use the proper key, your identity, to connect to it. Vagrant destroy will destroy the virtual machine, free up all resources it used. You have a handful of others. Recently, Vagrant provision has been added. I haven't used it for much of this, but they're pushing to use Vagrant through the full stack. There's a possibility to provision it out to the production environment as well. That might work in small cases. If you're doing something larger, you're probably going to be using your CI, your continuous integration environment to push it out. And, Vagrant halt will just suspend it and pause it. Sorry, halt will shut it down, suspend will pause it. You have resume, which will just load it back up, and Vagrant push does it'll push your deployment out to your provision target. So, any questions before we do the quick demonstration of some of this stuff? Nope. Everybody knows what Vagrant is? What's Vagrant?
Vagrant is a way of sort of checking in a virtual machine configuration for a project.
Acceptable. All right.
So that you can, okay.
That's good.
Good.
All right, so we'll first do an example. I actually showed this one before, and it's using a piece of code Chris wrote for the Ruby user group. He wrote a farmer's market API, so that's available on GitHub. This code, so he explains it here. It's a simple Sinatra app that connects to the USDA's API for farmers. So let's say we want to write some code for farmers. We need this API. This stuff's all in my repos. I'll share it afterward, but you can check out this Vagrant file here. And so here we're doing the same thing. We're using the Trusty64, configuring the network. Adding a synced folder for our code to develop in, and then we can do other things to the virtual box. Here we're deciding that it should only have 1024 RAM. This is important because when you're developing on your machine, if you're just creating a Ruby app, you're going to use whatever your system has. So my laptop has 8 gigabytes, but it's unlikely I'm ever going to deploy to a virtual machine with 8 gigabytes. So how am I going to catch a memory issue, right? If my app takes 4 gigs loaded into RAM, that obviously doesn't cut it if I'm deploying to 2 gigabyte instances of VMs. And then we'll provision it with this configure. So just a quick look at that. Here we're just going to install Ruby 2.0. This is all important. We'll install some prerequisites. We'll install Ruby. And then we'll install Farmers Market, which just runs a bundle install. So run Vagrant up. And then we can sit here and wait. Hopefully I have the machine downloaded. And I do, so we don't have to wait 10 minutes. First thing it's going to do is it's going to import the base box, is what this obviously says. That's the Ubuntu Trusty64. I've already downloaded it. It's tagged elsewhere. It's going to go through and go through the configurations. You can see that. Let's see where are we? Right, it's setting up the network here. Setting up SSH, you'll see it's running on 2222, right? That's why Vagrant SSH is useful, because you don't need to know all these details. Bringing the box up, allowing us to connect. And this is going to take a while, right? We're going to go through and do some apt-get updates. But this is just running that install script I showed you. And so now the benefit is, if you are working 10 years ago and you have shell scripts setting up your entire environment, you've now been able to take those shell scripts in your production environment and share them with your developers locally without any knowledge on their part. They don't have to know anything about the Linux command line. Well, that's run Vagrant up, I guess. So. not anything.
Enough knowledge to type in words.
That's right. You don't have to know how to install the appropriate packages, right? This is going to install the packages we need. Unfortunately, during the first run through, I fixed the problem in Chris's code that existed, but we saw a good reason for using this because in Chris's local environment, he ran his code and it worked perfectly fine.
Mm-hmm. Worked on my machine.
It worked on his machine. That's actually the image last time I had. It was like the worked on my machine. That's a common thing. You'll see Jeff Atwood has an article about that, and he has the worked on my machine badge, right? That was the most common excuse you would hear from developers 10 years ago. It's not quite as common anymore, but it still pops up. Yeah, I mean, it still pops up, right? It's not quite as common, but during the install, I knew it was going to happen. So he had not included a require that was necessary. And I don't know why I worked on his system, but we added the require. And right, so now we see that it works for everybody. Next time we distribute that code, next person gets the virtual box. Oh, you changed your gen file?
Still works on his machine.
Well, we're gonna go back and we're just gonna. What version was it? The worst. What are you doing updating this?
It still it still needs to be updated. There are actually some like security warnings that I haven't addressed yet.
That's my thing. Do I just like install the latest here? Oh yeah, my bad. No, that's not your fault. That's my fault. I'm using a volatile package. That's why we use stable releases, right? But anyway, we can fix that easily. So now that error happened during the provisioning, right? It did not happen when we were like creating our machine. So we don't have to reboot our machine and recreate it. We can simply run Vagrant provision, and it will start from the step where it creates our provisioner. So it'll rerun that shell script. In this case, it's a shell script, so unfortunately, we get to go through that, get updates again, right? When you use neater tools such as Puppet that I'll go into a little bit after this, Puppet's smart enough to know what it has done, right? Puppet takes a state, it compares it, and it will only change it if it's different. So while we're waiting, does anybody have any questions on what's going on?
Which of these tools needs Ruby to run? Does Puppet or does Vagrant?
Both of them, I think.
Oh, yeah.
I believe Vagrant's a Ruby tool, and I know Puppet is. So yeah, well, that's...
Yeah, the Puppet config is written in Ruby, right?
A lot of this stuff is Ruby. Like Chef's Ruby still. Like a lot of these DevOps tools are Ruby. It's surprising because you actually find Python tends to be more of a system language that's available, but people wrote this stuff in Ruby, and I'm all right with it. I like Ruby much more than Python. So
it's nice for scripting.
Mm-hmm. I'd rather be writing Perl, right? No, nobody.
No.
Not personally.
No. I spent a large amount of time doing that. So.
I've spent a large amount of time trying to avoid it.
So here, you can see we've passed that part where we're at, right? We fixed our problem. It wasn't Chris's fault, it's my fault. Again, a tool like Puppet would have helped us in this situation because it could have ensured the appropriate version was installed. So, should use not Nopagiri.
Sorry.
It's the worst gem to install, right?
No.
Probably not, but
It's up there.
PG for PostgreSQL on a Mac.
No bigger users.
Well, Postgres isn't bad.
Postgres is easy. PG isn't.
The gem?
Yeah. Because
I don't know. I don't install that in my development environment usually.
it requires a flag that you can't pass into bundler. So if
Oh.
you're working in an environment that expects to run bundle to install all the gems for you, it will blow up when being told to install PG. So then you have to go and install it separately with the right absurd flag.
Oh.
And then you can bundle and they'll say, oh, okay, I'm using the one that's there.
All right, so it says that we have everything going, and let me check real quick to see what my config actually did. All right, so I am not running the server right now, looks like, but we can use another neat command we learned, Vagrant SSH, and like I said, what this will do is it'll use a key that's private to Vagrant and was installed to the machine that we created, and so we don't have to know any credentials, just Vagrant SSH, and we're hopefully logged in as the user Vagrant, and we get access to do neat stuff like that, whatever we want to. So I assume I put it somewhere here. All right, so we can put up bind -b -o -o. And so we're going to run it, and if we go to our web browser, state, sorry. We do not have a connection. Oh, it's probably on 3000.
9292 probably.
9292. Find a method showing. What is this, Chris?
Oh, you know what that probably is?
Is this that? That's the thing I fixed, I thought.
No. This is a bug in Rack. Which version of Rack are you using? Are you using 1.6?
I mean, whatever's in your.
Yeah, well, let's look, because this is an older project. There is a bug, if it's relying on 1.6, there is a bug in 1.6.
Oh, this worked. No, it's 1.6. This worked before.
Well, I know it worked before, but it downgraded to 1.5.2, and we should be good.
Wait, what now?
1.5.2. Change.
Maybe this fixed it, right? Alright. Can I force rack in here?
Yeah, just gem
Yeah.
rack 1.
5.2?
Yeah, 5.2.
Oh, that one.
And that will not have the bug. There's a version more recent that also has fixed the bug, but I don't remember what it is.
Are you sure this isn't the thing that I fixed for you?
No, that thing was
Is it the
with the
JSON
JSON gem.
was?
Yeah, I know it gives you the least helpful error ever.
Yeah.
Just yeah, you're looking for some kind of string error.
So, Chris is correct. No, it's not working.
Huh. Well, that's what that should be.
Actually, it was not.
Did you bundle exec rack up? Oh.
Shouldn't matter.
Now it should work.
Yeah. Alright.
So you say.
What I get for not using my shell aliases, right? And that is a problem with the Vagrant machine. You do not have your shell aliases unless you install everything. But now you can see we have Chris's neat app, and if we want to say something else, right? So here we're on our local machine on the bottom and the virtual machine up top. So we have this directory change. This is say close to. We can now, we just change it down there and do another bundle exact rack up. And our application is hopefully updated, and it has, right? So now I can take this same Vagrant file, and once I correct the version on the Ruby and the rack bug.
It needs a little bit of love, yeah.
Right. Anybody could take it and do the same thing, right? You could clone the repository, you could type Vagrant up, you could make a change, you could commit, and you're back to where it works, right? And you know that'll work in your production environment because you're using these same shell scripts to create your production environment, hopefully. So, another tool used in conjunction with most of this stuff is Puppet. And so I touched briefly on what Puppet was. It's just a configuration management tool. Is anybody familiar with Puppet? Touched it, used it in other ways? Probably a lot of people use Chef, which is very similar. So, well, it's the same thing, basically. People argue like this over it, right? But in the end, it's all the same. So, we'll do a brief walkthrough of Puppet. So, just to go through the Vagrant stuff again, here's our Vagrant. Get rid of this. And hopefully that doesn't break anything. But it's the same stuff. We're using Trusty64. We've set up another IP for it locally, and we have a provision script that will run, which does what is this? Sorry, this is an older project. So we have this, and this apparently just installs Pico, does some other stuff, right? This does some important things we need. So we'll go ahead and run Vagrant up on this. And because we're using the same virtual box, there's no downloading again, right? If I hadn't downloaded this in advance, it'll know what Ubuntu/Trusty64 is. We're relying on a known virtual machine. It'll go ahead and download that automatically. It'll take here probably 10-15 minutes on better internet. 2 to 3. But you can always make sure you have the correct version. You can see that it's notifying me that somebody has updated this specific box that I'm using from what I've downloaded. I can update it if I want. I'm not too concerned with it right now. Same stuff. Here's what I was talking about where it creates your key. Oh, it's gone. Right? Where all it does is just add a key, creates the user, and it'll set that up automatically. So now we'll go through Puppet real quick. So like I said, Puppet is not something that manages your entire system. In order for Puppet to watch something, you have to explicitly define that you're watching it, right? So if you have something, let's say you want to add an entry to etc host, right? Everybody's familiar with etc host. It's just a file that lets you specify an IP address to a name, right? That's how the internet works. Is there's an IP and it gets sent to a name. Usually you go to an external source to look that up. With host file, you can force it something locally. So that's something you might commonly change. So let's say I want to add an entry to that, and in Puppet I set it up to add that entry. It'll add that entry, but what it won't do is touch any other file on your system. It'll only look at etc host, and as long as that file is the same, Puppet will not do anything. And that's important to understand, that it doesn't keep your entire system intact, it keeps what you told it to keep intact. So I have several examples of this somewhere. Here. And so the first one we'll go through. Oh, I don't have them installed. That's not awesome. Which way is better? Horizontal or vertical? vertical for this. All right, so we're gonna open up our first manifest and hopefully VI is installed, and it is. So one of the common things you do with your Puppet manifest is you manage users. So the way Puppet works is we have a resource. These are defined, oh, that sucks. User here. These are defined by Puppet the language. So what we have is a resource. It has a name, is what it's called. It's just a description, but most of the time that's part of it. Like in this case, it's our username. And then ensure present means that we want to make sure the user TM exists on our system. And we want to make sure the user folks does not. So right now, we can see that neither of these users exist right now. So if we run our Puppet code, hopefully I can remember how to do this. Of course, we have to be a group to create users and to run the Puppet command in general. So we ran that. You can see that it shows what has changed. So it says user TM is created. We remember in our file that we also had folks, but he's ensured absent. So we did not create him. So we went here, changed him to present. What is going on? I don't know how to use VI. Right, we'll see that this run through should create the user folks. It does. It's not like we had originally. We actually don't want him on our system. We'll rerun it. We should see that he is removed, right? And so what we've now done is we've created a record that can be checked into source control again, another important part of this, which is key to pretty much everything we're doing these days. This record is checked into source control, and we know who was on our system, right? I can go back to this record, I can see who's supposed to be there, who's not supposed to be there, who we've removed, who we've added. And so that, like, we've just created an audit trail for ourselves because using our repository Git, we have everybody who's changed it and when they've changed it, as long as you don't rewrite it. You can do lots of other cool things. We'll look at creating files. So there are 3 ways you can create files. First one's simple, right? We are ensuring a file is present at this location, and we're just going to give it the content hello. That's pretty self-explanatory. I think we can all guess what's going to happen in this case. The second one is going to use a source file instead. So it's going to go look at this location. It's going to make sure every time it runs that those 2 files match. And the third one is you can use a template, which I'll show you the template after we run this. But we'll just run it, see what file is created. So we'll go out to temp. We can see that there are now 3 files, test1.txt, test2.txt, test3.txt. Interesting to point out is that if you look at the second file, it's owned by Vagrant. You can see that right here. That's because we're matching the files together, right? The owner of the group or something you can specify as well in these other commands. That's more advanced, but just know that when you match it, it has to match exactly. So we'll look at test 1. Does anybody know what test 1 is going to have inside of it? Any guesses?
Foobar.
Come on, someone's got to know.
Hello.
There we go. Just hello. See, right? Content hello, right? So we're going to pull it up. Sure enough, we have hello. So we'll look at this other file we created. This is our source file, right? Vagrant files, txt is where we got our source from. I would add it, but I think I use that as an example later, unfortunately. Right, so here, we can create a file from another, right? What do you think this file here is going to say, test2? Any guesses? There we go, right? Simple enough. Now the third one was created from a template. So we'll pull up this template. So it says, you said something, right? So we have over here, we're pulling that template and we have a variable here, something equals hello. So any guesses what test3 is going to contain? Right? You said hello, right? So these are super simple examples, but now imagine you're starting to handle bigger configuration files, right? So across your configuration file, you can create this template and have many variables throughout it that either pull things from your system or whatever else you need to set into it via variables, and it's dynamic now. So we'll go ahead and look at example 3, which will install Vim for me, hopefully, finally. So in my install script, this real quick, my config. Here, we installed the package Alpine Pico. That was only so I could remove it later. So we'll go ahead and run so we're going to end up with Vim installed, Alpine Pico removed, and then Vim will obviously take a little bit longer, but it's installed now, right? So we can see that it changed, and now the next time I go to use Vim, I don't get an error again. So we'll look at our fourth example. Does anybody have a guess of what the output of this will be? Notify is just something, it's like a printf in your program, right? Pretend you're shotgun debugging and you're just throwing print statements all over your code. Does anybody guess what's going to be outputted?
First, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh.
All right, it'll probably come in that order too, right?
Certainly hope so.
Oh yeah, I don't know if it's synchronous.
So, but it did not. So you see second, sixth, first, fourth, fifth, seventh, fourth, third, right? So this is an important thing to understand in Puppet, and this is the biggest difference from Chef. Chef will execute a file top down. Most of your programming languages execute things top down. Puppet is not determinate in that regard. It will, so it takes this, it takes notify, it takes notify, puts them all together. Those are all hashed. And then, so the order, like if I had a notify 8th, we're not even going to see the same order here, right? It won't be second, first. It'll be a completely different order. Now, as long as I maintain the same order, because the way hashing algorithms work, we're going to see the same order every time. You'll find that causes many headaches when you depend on ordering that you do not explicitly define. But obviously we don't want this to come out, right? We want to see first come first, right? And so what we can do is we can specify the dependency trail. So it requires a way to do that. So what we've done here is we've defined the notify first, like we did the first time. And this time when we do our second notify, we require that notify first happens before it. And we go all the way through the chain, right? Third requires second, fourth requires third, right? So on. And now if we run this one, we will see that we get the order correct. Again, this is probably if you see anything here, remember this if you ever touch Puppet, and you'll run into a lot of headaches if you don't remember this.
Now, is this happening because Puppet is building a hash on its own behind the scenes?
Yes, and then it runs the commands in that hash order and not order you explicitly define.
Okay.
And the reason it does that, a little more advanced. We talked about this in the chef presentation last time, if anybody was there. But so if you specify a resource twice, right, you're obviously having a conflict, right? Now in chef, last in wins, but in Puppet, it'll alert you. It says, hey, you're trying to control this thing twice. You're not going to get the output you desire. And so like, there are advantages to both ways, right? Obviously, it's much easier to just have it go in order, but you gain a lot of knowledge by knowing what exactly is happening. It forces you to know your own dependencies, which is an advantage. I mean, like I said, you'll see arguments both ways.
Right. I was just curious, given that Ruby has changed the way it does hashes, and whether that was going to have any intersection with Puppet's behavior. But if it's doing the hashing on its own,
right? I mean,
it won't.
Yeah, I don't know if it's what sort of hashing algorithm it even uses behind the scenes, right? They may have their own. They might depend on the Ruby hashing. They may, right? Who knows what they're doing? They're just because actually in Ruby 1.9 plus, first in is first out in Ruby, and that is right 1.9, 1.9.1, somewhere in that range.
1.9.3 or later.
Might be
I thought it was
1.9.3.
2 or 2.1, but I wouldn't swear to it.
All right, it's somewhere in there, right?
Right, somewhere in there. Ruby
But that
hashes
did not
stop
affect
being-
this.
Yeah.
That's a good point.
Okay.
So yes, if you're using later Ruby, you'll still get this same
Okay.
output. That's by Puppet's design, right? They want to be able to reorder
Right.
things on the fly for their benefit
Right.
instead of yours.
Yeah, they look for the hash collision, and that's useful information.
Yep. So now we have a neat thing called facts, right? So a lot of this stuff isn't useful unless you can gather information about the operating system. Puppet uses something under the covers called factor. And what factor does is it lets you find out a fact about the OS. So, fact? I don't remember how to use it, honestly. Alright, whatever. There's a command I can run. It'll tell me what that value is. Instead, we'll just do it in Puppet. We'll run the manifest. And so now we've gained information about our system. We know that we're on a Debian system, or in the Debian family, right? We're on Ubuntu, so we're in that family. There's other things. There's an operating system tag if you need to know exactly what OS you're on. Usually Debians and Domfree packages are going to be the same names. We can see that we have an IP address of 10.0.2.15. That's obviously one of our IP addresses. There's probably ways to pull out the others. I honestly haven't looked into it that much. Most systems I work on have a single IP. And then we can see that we have been up for 15 minutes. So those are all useful things to know, right? But, let's see what's next. So now we want to put all that together to do something actually useful. So, is everyone familiar with NTP? I believe it stands for Network Time Protocol, but it basically is a way to sync the times across your machines. It'll go out and talk to a central server, ask it what time it is, come back to your server, change your time to that. This is important because a lot of systems, particularly older ones like Kerberos, but I think newer ones probably do too for security reasons, will check on the drift of your time because they don't want to serve requests that are out of time. As timing attacks are a common way for hacking into systems. So we want to make sure our system is the same time. So in order to set up NTP, we need to install the package, obviously, but we also want to change some of the configuration settings. So we have this right here, and etc.ntp.conf happens to be the file that controls this. And we created a file that controls this. So we just have a specific file. I think this is really the only thing I changed was setting up. That's probably all the same anyway. So we're like, let's say you accidentally remove everything, right? Like, what do we do now, right? But that's not an issue because we're using Vagrant. So we'll want to just clean up after ourselves. That VM is just a disaster. We can't touch it anymore. Oops. I didn't run that on my machine, did I?
I hope not.
I don't believe so.
I have before. Accidentally, for sure. Alright, well, I don't know why that, but we can easily fix that, right? Let's go clone our environment.
That's why I had it checked into source control.
That's right. Just checking to make sure. That's all gone. Alright. So we'll just clone this down again, because we screwed everything up. And now we'll be back to where we are. So if I wanted to give the presentation all over again for Puppet, we could. So that's, oh shit. Except for I didn't fix my Vagrant file, so I was trying to download. But anyway, we don't need to do that. I think the point is received, right? Alright, fine, I'll fix my file, and then I'll show you as the same. Sorry, that's just bigger enough view.
So you use Vagrant a lot. Making aliases.
Enough, yes, but that doesn't say much, right? Yep. 95 aliases, so. And so like I said, the benefit of this is now if I need to give this presentation 30 times in a row, I don't need to manually reset the virtual machine I was working in. I could destroy it, I could throw it back up again, and nothing would be installed again, and I could do the exact same explanations. Where I've really found this useful is setting up servers that I don't know how they're going to work. So at work we use a service called Shibboleth. Shibboleth is an authentication provider that is primarily used in EDU. And nobody at work had set one up. We had a VM, but the problem with the VM is it's expensive to destroy and rebuild in VMware, right? I gotta call my system administrator, I gotta say, hey, I screwed up, can you delete the virtual machine for this and create it again? He gets angry at me, he does it, and 20 minutes later I can do my fine thing. Usually that's more like weeks later, right? Depending on where you work. In this instance with Vagrant, I was able to create my own virtual machine locally. I would install things, realize I broke something, destroy the machine, but I'd have my Puppet code up to the point that I knew it worked, so I could just rerun and get immediately back to that point. And so now we've taken away that aspect of having to start over, right? Or not know what you did to your system and just unleash it on the world. And that's all documented and checked into the repository, which is important. So there's several other talks. I'll link the presentation somewhere later. The first two are pretty good. I have not watched the third one, but I've been recommended to include it in this, so I plan on watching it when I have time. The second one's by the guy who actually created Vagrant. He split into a company, and I can't remember what it's called.
HashiCorp?
Yes, HashiCorp. And HashiCorp is a company that has provided tools, usually written in Ruby, that are revolving around this whole development to production pipeline in a resilient way, not a resilient, a reproducible way. So they have tools like Packer. Packer's a tool that'll create these VirtualBox images. What's their latest one?
Vault.
Yes, Vault, which that's not the one I was thinking of. I didn't know that one existed. Well, there you go, right? They're just throwing out new tools all the time that are useful. I recommend checking out HashiCorp.
HashiCorp is good. It has Atlas, which is their repository of Vagrant images. So a lot of different developers create pre-packaged Vagrant virtual machines with Puppet on them. With
Right, and that's what I'm using
Chef
here,
on
right?
them.
I didn't have to install Puppet or anything. Ubuntu Trusty 64 came with that. All this stuff's available online. These are useful links. The 2 sample projects I used, I will fix them with mistakes, with the bugs, I guess. Hopefully Chris does not update his code, or maybe he will update it to not have the rack up bug. Maybe I'll just create a pull request for him again.
Do it.
And so you can download this stuff, you can try it out on your own. Like I said, we talked about the installation back here. I linked to the specific Vagrant installation because they'll tell you how to install it on your system. On Mac, it's easy, brew install Vagrant. On Linux, it's easy, you download the package and dpkg install it. After you install your virtual box, Windows is probably an executable, it might work. I don't know, the command line's lacking, but I think
Windows actually has trouble. You have to modify the Vagrant file to actually show VirtualBox, the VirtualBox console, because you can't. Vagrant tries to use the native SSH to verify that the machine is up, and there is no native SSH on Windows, so you have to do a little bit of tomfoolery to get Vagrant
Is
to
they
work
explain
well.
that in the Vagrant? Probably? I don't know. That's probably, I'm gonna actually look at Windows.
I don't know if they do, but
Windows install, you can download it, maybe it works.
but Google will tell you how to fix it if you run into problems on Windows with Vagrant. But there are also, you can use, there's Windows 10 VM images out on Atlas,
Right.
so you can use this not just for Linux virtual machines or BSD virtual machines, but also for Windows virtual machines.
And that's a good point, right? Is I don't know who does Windows around here, if anybody's a Windows administrator, but if you're a Windows administrator, these tools also apply there, right? Vagrant does create images. Windows has DSC, maybe? I'm not 100% sure on the name, but they have their own provisioning tools. Puppet works on Windows as well. The code is not as universal as everybody might. Like it's like a Docker container, right? People are like, yeah, it's universal, but it's universal. It'll work maybe. So, yeah, there's the resources, and like I said, take it home, try it. All the stuff will be posted somewhere. You can download it, try out Vagrant, especially for systems. It's useful for developing code, as we saw with the Ruby application. And I guess that's it. If we don't have any questions, I assume we have lots of questions, so ask them. Somebody.
Is there a way to get Puppet to kick off, like a series of Puppet manifests to kick off automatically when you do your Vagrant up?
So yeah, so that's, I did not, so we can pull up the sample project. This is a more complicated module that I maintained or helped maintain for a while. It's fine, not mine. GitLab is a open source GitHub basically, right? It's a Ruby application, you download, you install it, and now you have your own GitLab or GitHub locally for free without paying for enterprise. This module does that. This is the module I maintain. Noel assisting with the maintenance of it. I put together this project, Vagrant GitLab. And what Vagrant GitLab is, as you can guess, the repository containing the Vagrant file for our instance. So we take a look at this one, and is that big enough? So now we can also run Puppet as a provisioner. So this will go ahead and it'll pull in a bunch of stuff. But the important parts are we've specified that we wanted to apply this manifest file, gitlab.pp. And so every time we run Vagrant provision, it'll run this file. The same thing applies for Chef. There's a Chef provisioner. There's probably a Salt Ansible one if you're familiar with those. There's going to be pretty much any plugin you want. Check that real quick. Right. Apparently you can create a custom provisioner, I guess. Even. That's not what I want to see. I want to see the existing. Like I said, no. Alright, so yeah, you can see some over here. You see Chef, Docker provisioner, Puppet provisioner, Salt, Shell. There's just some simple file base, right? So whatever you want to provision with, you can do in Vagrant. The neater thing, and unfortunately I haven't looked at this, this Vagrant push command I talked about with this is a way to provision your production environment from Vagrant. You can specify FTP, you can specify, I think SSH in here, but you set a strategy, you set your environment. Those environments have server names and IPs and whatever else you want, and it'll automatically push it up there. So, like I said, may not be useful if you're managing an entire stack, but if you have your local one-off server that you want to get in the cloud, but you want to do it the right way, this might be a useful thing for you to check out. So, other questions? Alright, I guess that is all then.